Welcome to Paeds at Ease, where we put you at ease about all your children's health needs. Today, we will be speaking about growth and how to make sure your child grows properly. My name is Dr. Sandra and I'm a pediatrician. Welcome. So this topic is extremely important to most people. Many parents are extremely worried about whether their child is growing properly. Many grandparents usually ask this question about whether their grandchild is growing properly. Many aunties and uncles are also worried about whether everything they're doing at home is actually the proper thing. So this topic, since it's extremely important, I'm going to be splitting it into two parts. The first video, I'm going to be dealing with normal growth, and the second video, I'm going to be dealing with problems in growth. So let's start. What is growth? Growth is an increase in size or an increase in development. And a child's only job is to grow. So if a child is not growing, then we know that there's something wrong and we have to intervene to make sure that the child is actually doing the job that they're supposed to do. Now, when we measure how a child is doing or how a child is growing, we don't just start at birth. We start all the way from conception. And the most critical period in a child's growth is what we call the first 1,000 days. That's from the day of conception up to 2 years. If you make sure a child grows beautifully in these first 1,000 days, you actually set the tone, you set the trajectory of where the child will grow throughout the rest of their lives. So this first 2 years is so important, it's critical in a child's life. Now, a pregnancy is divided into 3 sections, which are called trimesters, which are 3 months each, since we say that a pregnancy takes about 9 months. So in the first trimester, what do we want to make sure so that we know that the child is growing properly? I would advise, if anyone is planning to fall pregnant, that you actually start doing all the things that you're supposed to do in pregnancy already before you fall pregnant. What are these things? First, you need to make sure you're eating a very healthy diet, and that includes certain supplements that we may need to take extra. One of the supplements that we need to take extra is what we call folic acid. Folic acid is critical for the development of the brain and the spinal cord. So when this folic acid is low, we get a condition called spina bifida, where at the back we notice that the spinal cord or the spinal column didn't actually close or develop properly. So we want to prevent this by making sure you're taking enough folic acid before pregnancy and during especially the first trimester. Another thing that is important to do in the first trimester is to make sure you're not doing the following: no alcohol, no smoking, and no drugs. Drugs also include illicit drugs or certain medications that may be dangerous in pregnancy. So if you are on chronic medication means medicine you have to take every day. You have to speak to your doctor to make sure that this medicine that you're taking every day, is it dangerous in pregnancy? If it is, your doctor will have to change you to something that is safer in pregnancy and maybe advise you as to what alternatives you have. So don't just stop your medication. Please go to the doctor so that they can change you to something else, or maybe the medication you're taking is safe in pregnancy and you'd be safe to continue. But smoking and drinking is a big no-no. These things really affect the growth of the baby. Smoking actually can make that the baby doesn't develop at all or develops very small according to the size that the baby was supposed to be. And drinking can affect the brain completely, and the baby can actually come out with a lot of developmental issues in the brain and in the heart. So these things are very dangerous for the baby. Now, on to the second trimester. In the second trimester, we will be checking the mom to make sure the mother doesn't have other conditions like high blood pressure that can develop in pregnancy or diabetes that may develop just because of pregnancy. These things can affect the size of the baby, and they can also affect whether the baby is born too early. It is important, this is why it is important to make sure if you are pregnant to go check at the clinic. Make sure your midwife or your obstetrician is checking you to make sure that the baby is growing properly and that you are healthy. In the third trimester, the baby is growing really big, and this is the time when we actually make sure that the baby has grown completely well with the same issues that we would be dealing with in the second trimester. It is important to stay healthy, to stay strong, to stay fit, so that you're also strong when the baby is born. Now, when the baby is born, what are the things we measure in growth? We measure the head circumference, that is the area around the head. This then shows us that the brain has grown properly. We measure the length. This will show us whether the baby is actually short compared to what we expected, whether the baby is very tall compared to what is going on, and we'd have to just see. Or we also measure the weight, and this weight is very important in determining how we will measure the baby going forward. Now, there are three things that are important in the baby's growth in order to determine what to expect for how the baby should grow. The first thing is the genetics. It's how your parents are. If your parents are short and slender, it is likely that you would also be short and slender. If your parents are really tall and hefty, it's likely that the baby will also be tall and hefty. So all these people are normal, and we need to make sure that we're not measuring the baby according to a standard that is not for them. So the genetics of your parents really determine what we expect of the baby. Second thing, the nutrition. So this is extremely important. In the first few weeks of life, we would like the baby to be breastfed. Breastfeeding is not possible in every scenario, but if you can help it, breast really is best. In the first few days, the colostrum, which is the first very thick milk that is produced by the mom, that contains immune factors that actually protect the baby. So it is important to make sure breastfeeding is established nicely. If you'd like more information about how to make sure the latch is good, please watch my video on how to latch the baby properly. And this will be really important to make sure that the baby is actually taking all the milk that they should with breastfeeding. If the baby is formula feeding, then the doctors or the nurses will give you the calculations to make sure that you're giving the baby the right amount of formula, and you have to make sure that the formula is prepared in the proper way. Please check out my website for an article on how to mix formula properly, how to make sure the bottles that are used for formula are sterilized correctly, and how to make sure that you actually have weighed all the pros and cons to make sure that you're not making a mistake if you're choosing to formula feed, but making sure that you're feeding the child well. Now, in the first 7 days, note that the birth weight will drop. A baby may lose up to 10% of its birth weight and will only start gaining the birth weight from day 7. So only from about day 7 of life will the baby start gaining, and may only reach its birth weight by 10 days or only by 2 weeks. So the first 2 weeks, we expect that the baby's weight will drop. Naturally, this will be losing the excess fluid through urine, and it will gain again. And then after that, the baby will gain about 30 grams a day, which is about 1 ounce every day. So that's from about 10 days to 14 days, then we expect that the baby will start gaining quite regularly. If there are problems in the first 2 weeks with feeding, you need to just make sure you go to your healthcare provider to just make sure that if you're worried about something, and if the doctors or the nurses are worried about anything in terms of the feeding, whether the latch is not good or the formula is not being given in the correct way, that can also affect growth. Now, let's say everything has gone properly. We've checked genetics. We see the trajectory of the child's birth weight, and going forward, we've checked the nutrition is good. The third thing that is really critical to normal child's growth is the social circumstances. What does this mean? This means that a child needs love, a child needs affection, a child needs attention. I'll repeat: the child needs love, the child needs affection, the child needs attention. A child needs to be touched, a child needs to be cuddled, a child needs to be held. Let not anyone tell you that you are showing too much love to a child. A baby cannot receive too much love. This love is critical for attachment and for the child to become extremely secure in themselves and be able to take risks later in life. The more love the baby gets in the early days of its life, the more independent and secure the child will be later in life. So please make sure that you don't just put the baby on the side or neglect the baby or make sure, okay, the child is fed and the child is clothed and that'll be fine. No, a baby really does need that love, those cuddles. That's why I think naturally they're so cute and they make us want to touch them and hold them. Please hold your baby, love your baby. The baby can never receive too much love. The only thing is that the housework doesn't get done. If the baby wants to be held all day, it's true, you can't get much done around the house, but that's fine. And that's why we need support and that's why we need one another. But give the child affection and love. These three things are the things we look at to make sure the child is growing. There's something I just want to show you so that you know that when we measure your child, we put this child on a growth chart. And so that you don't compare your child with another child, because you might be thinking that your baby is too small or too big, but actually that baby is perfect according to how they are supposed to grow. So we measure and put the child on these charts and we keep serially measuring. So you'll notice that we check this baby at 6 weeks. 6 weeks is really a very important date. If there are any problems that the baby was born with, these might not show at birth and they might only show later. At the 6-week mark, this is when we can check, and a lot of heart problems or other issues usually show themselves at 6 weeks. The first 6 weeks can be very difficult for parents, and that's why we encourage parents to actually have support. And at 6 weeks, make sure you have gone and make sure at least a pediatrician has seen the child to make sure that they've double checked all these things. From there, if there's a green light, usually a midwife or a nurse practitioner can continue with the checking of the child through all these particular checks. So I'll go through the growth chart. I'm going to put it up and then show you what I mean by normal growth. So notice that there's a green line in the middle, and that's what we usually call the 50th centile or the 0Z score. And the orange line at the top, orange line at the bottom, all those are normal growth. So 50% of children are above the green line, 50% of children are below the green line. So can you imagine this is a girl's growth chart? A child at, let's say, almost 6 months. A normal child might be 5.5 kilograms and the same normal child might be 9.5 kilograms. So notice that that's all normal. And notice how the growth chart actually continues, and basically what we want to see is that your child is following their own curve. Not that we want everyone to be in the middle, no, but we want that the child is actually growing on their own curve. The last thing I want to tell you guys is that if you are worried about the child's growth, it's always better to just go and let the child be measured. We will measure the same things that we measured at birth. We'll measure the head circumference, we'll measure the length, we'll measure the weight to make sure that the child is actually following the curve that they're supposed to do. We have many curves. The one I showed you now is the weight for age curve. There's a length curve, there is a weight for height curve, and there's a head circumference curve. These different curves show us the range so that we know that all these children are actually growing normally. At 6 months, that's when we introduce solids. And a child doesn't need to have solids before 6 months. Some people can introduce solid food at 4 months. However, 4 months, many children are not yet ready, but the body may be able to digest the food. So that's why WHO, the World Health Organization, recommends that at least around 6 months. Usually, if you can see the child can sit upright, can grab the food for themselves, is very interested in food, and is able to just sit up and control their body, then usually the child is ready to start. So sometimes it's around 5 months, sometimes it's around 6 months, but the cutoff is usually 6 months where you start adding solids to the milk. Join me in the next video for problems with growth. Thank you.